Hi, I'm Debbie Roy, and today we're in the studio with Craig Stockwell, who is the Program Director of the Masters of Fine Art program at the New Hampshire Institute of Art. Thank you for having me in your studio today, Craig. Mm-hmm. Great light, great work. I'm so excited. So you have been doing this a while. So tell me how you got started in art. Kind of walk me down. We're going to talk about your art first, what sustains your art and your practice, and kind of how you got started. So let's go way back and just kind of tell me how you got involved in art.
Right there.
And what you're trying to achieve.
So I actually did not get involved in art until I was a freshman in college. I started at Dartmouth College, and I took an art class on a whim, my first semester. And within a year and a half, I transferred out of Dartmouth and went to Rhode Island School of Design. I was enamored with painting and drawing. I wanted to be Van Gogh. And particularly, actually, it was the year 1970, 71 that art seemed, it was a very politically, a lot of turmoil at that time and a lot of questioning about personal meaning and direction. And there were a lot of things I knew I didn't want to be, most of which had to do with the things that you would become by going to Dartmouth College. And art immediately offered both an exciting, different environment, but also something that seemed a lot more meaningful to me and a lot more full of potential. But it was really, and it was the meaning. It was, I really admired Van Gogh for his sense of empathy, his sense of suffering, all those things that I felt were meaningful. I went to Rhode Island School of Design to be a painter, ended up being a glass blower, just because that was the most exciting department in the school at the time. And then through, many different changes of direction and media through my 20s. After I finished working with glass, I worked with glass sculpturally with large installations. And with that, I moved to New York City and showed at PS1, which is part of the Museum of Modern Art. Was written about in the New York Times, all these things when I was 28 years old, and just sort of thought, oh, that's the way it is. I'm there now. Everything is taken care of. Then lived in New York for 6 years, and actually most of that confidence and clarity evaporated in the pressure of the New York art world and the reality of it, and the reality of having to make a living and all of those pieces. And eventually, when my wife and I had our first child, that was a time and a place for me to leave New York and to say goodbye to art. And so I stopped making art and hunted around for about 6-8 years for other career possibilities, including elementary school teaching, classroom teaching, not art teaching, and eventually ended up doing art again from a very personal place, having really reached a state of being fairly hopeless about my career possibilities. And kind of stunned by that everything had fallen apart.
Well, and especially since you were so successful at first, do you feel, you went to undergraduate school, do you feel they prepared you for the art world, for the real world, and making a living at that time?
No, but it's interesting because RISD is I mean, probably the complaint about RISD is it's not like going to college, it's like going to work. I mean, you work full-time, it's very demanding. I was a hippie, I was resistant to that aspect of the full-time professional. I was much more interested in art as a spiritual activity, and so I was very confused about all that. And so I think part of it was the time. I think all of the schools are probably better at doing that now. But they are so professionally oriented now that actually that kind of magical on illogical, personal, spiritual thing that people investigate art for, that they respond to art for, is actually sort of put aside, and it's all about, networking, about planning, about finding your way in the professional world.
Oh, the art world, yes.
To
Knowing
the
right people.
Knowing the right people, to the loss of that kind of more private, poetic side.
Yeah, and we're going to get to more of that soon as you went back to graduate school.
Yeah.
But I want to continue on. So you spent 8 years just kind of making a living and growing a family, and you felt like you're missing something. What went on during that time?
Yeah, so during that time I began in the garage with the drawing table and just doing very private, personal stuff. And eventually I rented a small studio downtown here in Keene, and it was a place where I just could go, and the work I knew it had no future. The work wasn't going to be shown. It wasn't going to have end. But it was just something I had to do, and which was good to make that reconnection with the very personal voice and feeling. And then eventually I began to show around here and figure out what kind of work and how to show in Keene, New Hampshire, and what kind of stuff was interesting to people and what was still true to myself. And went on long enough with that where I decided at some point that, I'd heard about low residency MFA programs and was intrigued, but also very torn because it seemed ridiculous to me at the age of 45 to think of going back to school. And I basically thought, what a loser, that at the age of 45 and I don't know better. I don't know what, I don't have this figured out.
I think that's a common thing.
Yeah.
So what made you go back?
So I applied and didn't get in, and that pissed me off, and made me re-examine. And of course, I had applied somewhat half-heartedly and somewhat arrogantly, but they picked up on that apparently, and so I swallowed my pride and did a better job and applied again, and even then was sort of waitlisted, and it went on, and finally I showed up. I was accepted, and by that time I was ready to go and prove myself. And but even then, it was 2 years of very disorienting, very humbling, very humiliating experience in a lot of ways. But that, especially being an adult and having a world, having a wife and children, and having a place, somewhat of a place in the world, and feeling like, why am I suddenly having to go through this thing of being a teenager again, being in a place where I don't know how to do this right, and so that was actually very good because it forced you to dig deep and forced me to dig deep and find my voice and defend what it was I was trying to do, which was painting. And it was in an environment that was fairly unfriendly to painting. I was much more interested in post-studio practices. Mm-hmm. And I actually conceived of painting in my own way as a knowing studio practice that knew about post-studio and nonetheless was going on anyway. So I was sort of jumping one step over. It actually went extremely well, and I think I made a number of connections with people who really respected my effort.
Okay. So there's a big difference between undergraduate school, where you're kind of learning the technique and learning different skills of actually drawing and painting and sculpture and art, and graduate school, where you're kind of learning to apply concepts and making work more meaningful. Can you talk a little bit about, because I wasn't sure what graduate school is all about. I kind of jumped in and swam and figured it out, but there's a big difference, and I don't think there's a lot of information about what graduate school really is.
Well, and plus I think traditional graduate school is also very different from the low residency programs. Yeah. Because of the low residency programs, we are dealing with adults who have lives, who have a lot of things they've already kind of figured out, but want to find a way to fit art within that structure. And I think fundamentally that undergraduate school is about learning techniques, materials, familiarity with the art conversation, but not really not having to find yourself in relation to that. It's really about doing work. Yeah. And then graduate school, traditional graduate school is about developing a personal practice within those possibilities, now that you've got the grounding. And I think that the low residency programs are all the more so. It's understanding the context of contemporary art and finding your voice in relation to that, which may mean that you're resistant to it, but that you are actually at least acknowledging that it's aware, that it exists, it's valid, and you're making your choice in resistance to it because A, B, C, those kind of things. And I think particularly for our students and the identity of NHIA, I'm very devoted to this idea of sustainability, which to me means having finding in 2 years a way that your work can be enhanced, deepened, that you can broaden your references, broaden all that, and being able to articulate what it is you're doing, but also really building on what you have, rather than just sort of saying, oh, okay, you're in our graduate school now, throw that all out and here's what you got to do. I mean, I really want our program to be one that works with people where they are coming from, and finding a way that they can make that work for themselves and feel supported and sort of expanded in 2 years, but not left hanging at the end like, oh, I've run into all this fascinating stuff and everything, but I have no clue now how to carry on.
So the primary goal is sustainability. But what I discovered when I jumped in, I think a lot of people have a preconceived notion, like maybe you have a practice and you're kind of set in it, and I think you get shaken up, you get challenged, but those are good challenges. I think the first year or the first semester, there's a lot of people challenging you. Yeah. And kind of the ones that you resist most are typically the ones that you need to think most about. So there's kind of this yin yang of, okay, I want to challenge you and make you grow, and I want you to continue your work and make it a sustainable practice. Yeah,
and I think one thing, for example, on a day when you might have 4 or 5 crits during a residency, everybody soon discovers that you're oftentimes hear 4 or 5 completely different things. And so none of those are designed to be telling you this is the right thing. Every one of them is something for you to kind of process and feel, that really resonates. That doesn't resonate. Or I'm really resistant to that. I wonder why I'm resistant to that. Things like that. But everyone is not to provide answers, but to provide spurs,
food for thought.
Food for thought.
Yeah, and I found that too. Like I said, you get overwhelmed with a lot of people's opinions, thoughts, and encouragement, and room to grow. I had to walk away and kind of let it wash over me kind of for a few weeks, and then I would choose a new direction, which is not at all where I thought I was going to go. But it was very good.
And the very difficult thing is it's very hard not to take it personally. And of course it is personal because it's stuff that you care deeply about. And yet it's not personal in the sense that it's just a response to the things that people are seeing on the wall.
Well, I think that's one of the benefits of the program that you've been able to create, because it's not just teenagers getting out of college and going right to grad school. You actually do find a wide variety of people in all stages of life. And you've managed to create a very supportive environment where the students are supporting you and the mentors are supporting you. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, that's fundamental. It was my experience in graduate school. I think it is unique, more unique to a low residency program in the sense that, yeah, you have very mixed age groups and particularly a lot of older students. And I completely understand that the primary barrier is fear, and that's what most everybody is coming in with on some level. And, how to just say, put that aside. It's okay. Just what can we do to get you here, to be present, to kind of just forget that fear for a while and just be, part of this, make stuff, talk about it, and not feel that deep sense of exposure, which of course there is.
Yeah. Plus, also in the low residency program, it's also a very intense 10 days or so that are just jam-packed critiques and talking about your work and learning from other artists, and it's quite a bubble to kind of process.
Yeah, and you can't sort of have a 3-hour session and then go home for 2 days and think about it.
Work.
or make it better or anything. I mean, you have to keep going, and so I think that's also part of the intensity of that, of having to be on for 10 days, and and it breaks people down in a lot of ways, which are painful but good, because you simply have to keep going.
So as hard as that is, I think it's even harder that when you've left and you've gotten 20 or so opinions about your work,
and suddenly nothing.
And you had a great idea, and then you go home, and I find myself freezing for a while until I meet with my mentor and start talking about it and find my new direction. But any advice for the time in between the residencies, because it's not just 10 days and you're done?
Well, actually, my first thought is that is a pattern that will then repeat again and again throughout one's being an artist. I find, every time you have a show, there are these periods of intense making, intense, very lively reception. And then there's these periods where suddenly, everything goes quiet on you and nobody's talking to you. And so I think those rhythms are good thing to learn about and be familiar with. I think I would hope and it took me a very long time to learn this. I was been very oriented towards a sort of solitary, shut yourself away and work on it. But it is something where, okay, what resources do I have? What people do I have to talk to? And I think, for example, one of the best sustainability issues is that the group of people that you're there with as students are the ones that are going to be there for you afterwards, more so than the faculty, more so than that group that you can build. And particularly, one of the advantages we have at NHIA is that the geographic range of the students is fairly contained. Yeah. And that a lot of those students will be in that same art world, the sort of southern New Hampshire, maybe Boston art world.
Into New York, yeah.
Yeah, and these will be the people that you'll be going to openings with, that you'll be going to lectures with 10 years from now. And if you can kind of, say, this is actually a great opportunity at this point to, rather than when I'm completely alone 5 years from now, to make those connections now and to really, let people know I'm there for them so they can be there for me. Yeah.
Would you say that would be one of the main benefits of graduate school is because, I'm trying to learn about the art world myself. There's a lot to learn. It seems it's kind of like this big jump from doing art in your home or selling online to being a fine artist. So is one of the main benefits actually the networking and the people?
It is. And I was just reading a book today, which I can't quite remember the name of, and it's all about the contemporary art world. And one of the things he emphasizes over and over again is that we've changed into a kind of sociological system of mutual conversation and networking, and it's antithetical to the world, again, that sort of Van Gogh world, where that sort of solitary struggle. But in fact, there's a great out of that, I think, comes less idealistic artwork and more kind of, we're just in here, we're trying to do this, we're trying to maintain connections, in fact, the artwork is often done in order to maintain the connections, not in order to do a great work. So you get the difference a little bit? When I used to do paintings, every one of them there was something I was trying to get, some something that would just knock people off their feet, you know, and knock first me and then them. And that's still in there. But now, you know, what I want out of a painting, which is kind of the same thing but different, is I want this to give me entree into other people being interested in it so that they'll talk to me. You know, the painting is just the thing that I sort of put there as my calling card.
Yeah, something to spark a conversation, a real conversation, you know, more thought, more deep.
And that's why, you know, today, in a sense, so much of the artwork kind of exists digitally and kind of exists in Facebook and places like that, because it's just you're putting it out there so that people know, oh, that's what you're working on, that's the questions, that's the, and the actual objects are kind of becoming secondary.
But you're also losing the personal connection. So what do you think about online and selling your work and websites and all this flood of social art?
I think it's great. I mean, Facebook actually was hugely important for me the last couple of years. I think it was partially responsible for getting me the fellowship in New York for a year, just because of contacts I'd made through that. And anybody who spends a lot of time looking at a lot of digital images, it is all the more special and satisfying when you actually go to the museum and spend an afternoon looking at paintings, because you realize, oh, you know, this is what I've been missing. The actual experience of paint and texture and scale and color, because, you know, digital color is different.
Well, do you feel like people actually make the leap? Do they just look at things online and then go to the museum, or do they just look online and move on?
Well, I mean, like painting, I now understand that there's a very small, particular group of people who are devoted to painting. That people who've done a lot of it, who've come to love the things that it can do. And so it's the same, you know, it's this very specialized conversation. And those that are engaged in that, you know, one of the things that they find is that, boy, you know, to spend an afternoon looking at physical paintings is just deeply satisfying in a way that, you know, the digital stuff is informational, gives you a clue, gives you some, gives you a range of possibilities, but, you know, in the end, the best of it sends you to not necessarily look for that exact painting, but to go, so I want to see this guy's work, you know, I want to see what it really does.
In person, it's a much more personal, moving experience, I would say. So I'm going to move on. So you touched on it a few times. The commitment to be an artist, it's kind of isolating. Most of us have to balance family and life, and we have to be a little bit selfish to send ourselves back to school and devote the time. So what are your thoughts on that? I had an old friend, a musician, and I remember him saying once that, you know, that old line of, I'm not chasing it, it keeps chasing me. You know, I mean, most people who are really engaged in art, it just, there's something about making things in that way that just keeps calling them back. There's something nagging, something missing. That's why I came back after 40 years.
Something satisfying, and still to me, you know, an afternoon in the studio with the music playing and getting lost in it, there's nothing like that. And I find, you know, when I have extended periods of time where I don't get in here, there's an anxiety I have that I need to, you know, I need to get back.
So does that make you more calm and balanced that when you are outside of the studio and living the rest of your life with your family or your friends or whoever, does that kind of balance out, and it kind of makes you a better person to be with them? Would you say?
that might be the case, yeah. I mean, I experience it mostly, you know, internally as just, you know, what's the saying? I know. I've been, you know, 2 weeks I've been on the road doing this and that, or going to New York and being with, and, you know, I need to be in that studio. And it may be as much the sort of solitude and quiet as the making, because just, you know, once you start to get lost in the making of things, a lot of the chatter shuts up.
It's a form of meditation.
Yeah.
And I think you find, what I found is, like, if you just ignore it, it doesn't go away. There's always a part of you that's missing until you go back and fulfill that.
Right.
So it's necessary.
Right.
All right, so I want to get back to your work. So you kind of started, what did you set out to be before you became an artist? You said you kind of didn't plan on being an artist.
No, I mean, when I went to college, I was just going to, I wanted to be a history teacher.
Yeah.
But I got kind of interested in teaching. And teaching is, I worked for Outward Bound all through my 20s. And so I was always interested in sort of alternative education. And particularly this idea, experiential education, which, instead of learning by theory and reading, and that you actually learned by doing things and by having experiences that you could reflect on. And so, actually for me, one of the things that, having taught in traditional college and such, it's always curious to me how college level teaching, very few of those teachers have any training in teaching. And nor is there a great deal of reflection actually about education. And that is actually something that's been a huge part of my life. And I've thought in many different ways and many different possibilities about teaching, about the experience of learning and all that. And so, the chance to be involved with a new program and to actually think through what is the experience of learning art, particularly for adult learners. And one of the things I keep coming back to is this issue of fear. Again, that it's making art, using materials, finding a certain expertise, technical expertise, all that is pretty obtainable by most everybody. Mm-hmm. You can find a medium, you can work with it, you can develop a body of work. But most people are really shut down by some kind of fear and some kind of sense of, I can't do this, I shouldn't be doing this, I can't, how do I do this? All that stuff. And so, that very much goes back to my whole Outward Bound thinking about, because it's the same thing as a kid stuck on a 30-foot cliff and trying to rock climb, and the same kind of psychological process of encountering a fear and being both challenged and supported. And of course, as you know, in the MFA, that's that combination of
yeah, I find that very thrilling. So you started in sculpture or glass blowing, and you got back to painting. Mm-hmm. So what is your work about now?
Yeah. One of the simple things I say is my work is about painting, which, some people say that and you hear that and it's thought of as, oh, what a dreadful thing, so insular, that if painting is just about painting, isn't that just kind of like a carousel? But I think that, to me, what's really interesting is anytime I'm painting, what painting offers in an afternoon of work is 100 choices during that afternoon. You're constantly encountering choices, and every choice you come up against, there's suddenly like 50 reasons to go this way, 50 reasons to go that way. And all of that makes you reflect on, what do those choices mean? What do those choices mean? And ultimately, the fact that painting has no utilitarian purpose, where you can't do anything with it. It's sort of unnecessary object, other than, of course, the deep satisfaction of beauty and all those things. But
culture of beauty.
But I think that exercise of, in an abstract way, and I don't mean as an abstract painter, but of spending an afternoon reviewing choices, where the stakes are not immediate and high. It's not like you're driving down the road, and if you can turn left or right. If you turn right, you crash. If you turn left, there's somewhat more harmless stakes. But because of that, they actually can become deeply ethical in a funny way. I find in the studio in an afternoon, I will often, where I go to is actually going through the past and thinking about people, thinking about events, thinking about, and somehow that, I also feel completely that working in the abstract way, where I'm constantly, this has happened, now I do this. I'm not trying to reproduce anything. So in that, it gives me the freedom for the mind to wander and think about people. So I think that all of, I never think that an abstract painting is void of meaning. Because I think all of that whole afternoon, all that thought, the color choices you make, the line choice, it's in there. There's a tremendous amount of feeling and a sense of being alive and attentive in the world.
And so what is the reaction when people see your work? What kind of reaction do you get?
The whole range. I think another sad thing in our world is that so many people are afraid of art. They somehow think that art is making fun of them.
I think they don't understand art.
Well, they don't, but the feeling is that they're being made fun of somehow because they don't understand it. And so, I wish, part of my small mission is to, have people be, this can be a wonderful part of your life, and let it in. And you go to the Museum of Modern Art in New York City on any day, and the 25,000 people going through it's an awful lot of people seem to still to really find something beautiful about paying attention to it.
That's good.
But what was the original question?
What kind of reaction do you get
What kind of reaction,
when people view your work?
Yeah, and the whole range. I think, I always feel, frankly, in some ways, that it's this weird thing. I always feel some way that the work is darker and incomprehensible. And when people come in and just sort of say, oh, I love the color, or I love the, there's so much movement in here, or oh, it's there. Often, my work is full now of a lot of color and movement, so people will respond to that and say, oh, this is really, this feels so alive in here. And actually, if I were to ask for one response, I'd say, oh, there's something really alive happening in here. I don't know what it is, but it's alive. I'd love that, because that, and that, that it really is about very basic things, very basic sort of sense of color, sense of shape, sense, I find the more I work as an artist, it so much enhances every time I walk out of here. I'm so much more aware and alive to pattern and color and everything. And I think it can, my thought is it can do that for people too, if they're not afraid of it.
Yeah. So you work in the abstract. How do you know when you're done? Previously, up until about a couple of years ago, most of the work I did was sort of rule-based. And so I had a prescribed set of steps. And when those steps were completed, it was done. Because that's one of the things I didn't want to be making judgments of, oh, it's really beautiful, it's not so beautiful, I should put a little red here. I wanted it to be, this is it. It's the result that was meant to happen, and here it is, live with it, for me. And I think it's really interesting thing about abstract art. These works over here, for example, you can see I'm actually duplicating paintings, and there's going to be the third one of the same painting too. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the things I'm doing is to do 3 or 4 versions of one painting and take one too far, keep one really barely there, and sort of try to find a range of possibilities. Because I think that a painting usually, a painting that's gone too far, you've killed it because you're trying too hard to make something happen. You overwork it.
And a painting that is not enough there, it's oftentimes this feeling that, oh, look what I did. You sort of, it's quickly there and it seems so substantial. And then you put it aside for 2 weeks, 2 years, 5 years, and eventually I'll say, yeah, I really did get that. Or, yeah, okay, let's back to work. So those are the kind of decisions about when it's done.
Yeah, and then each one you do, you kind of build upon, you create new thoughts, patterns, and new things go into each one.
And I think also, I mean, as a less experienced painter, I think more often than not, I went too far because I wanted to sort of finish up every little thing that was bothering me.
I think that's common. That's a common rule. We overdo, so less is more.
Well, and that is also the place, people say this all the time, I finally came to understand it. That's the place where the viewer can actually go in, are the places that aren't so figured out. There's a place where they can take over and try to figure it out themselves as a viewer.
And then you learn as a painting is as much as you put in, you talk about your whole process and all the thoughts that you put into your painting, once you put it up on a wall, everyone brings their own stuff to the painting.
Absolutely, yeah.
So once you put your painting out there to the world, you get a lot of reactions. But the thing that I don't feel like they taught me in school is the business side of art. So there's a lot of ways an artist can go, in each success may be different for someone, a gallery or a show or residency. What are your thoughts on the business side of art? How do you make it as an artist? How do you survive as an artist?
If you were to be a dental hygienist, it would be a very easy question. You do A, B, C, and you get this job. And I think one of the troubling and fascinating things about art is that it's very mysterious, and there are so many different paths. I think in terms of the business side, I think it's having a relationship to the business side that feeds the kind of relationship to your art that you want to have. Because, of course, the more commercialized you are, that makes demands on your art in a very different way than the very private side. I mean, in some ways, an artist who does paintings very much for themselves and is very private is completely legitimate. Likewise, somebody who makes the decision to, they have something that the public wants. It sells successfully. And I think I'm talking about, say, in New England, at a gallery that wants, really nice woods scenes or paintings of Mount Monadnock. And if you have the skill to do that, you can do it, and it's very satisfying for you to turn those paintings out. That's terrific. That's something that can give you a particular way of making money to support. And perhaps then you have some of your more private work that you keep to yourself. But the craft of painting can give you some good living. Tends to be that the more private your work is, the more kind of personal. It's not very sellable. And in fact, the curious thing, it only becomes sellable at the sort of high level, where you can get into the galleries that are really sort of museum level galleries that are selling to museums and such, because this is weird work that isn't comfortable to live with. Nobody wants it in their houses really, but is really fascinating as a cultural artifact. And then, of course, I think that for myself, I define success in art at this point as being in the conversation. As I said before, the paintings are what get me into the conversation. I have very sporadic sales. Some years I do really, really well. It sort of depends on who I cross paths with or what consultant or something. I constantly think I should put more into it and constantly get distracted and would rather make more paintings than putting time into doing the sales and getting things like that. So it's and I think also it's completely understandable now at this point in the art world to build an art career on showing, teaching, writing, lecturing, all those various components that can make up a whole involvement. and can be very satisfying. It used to be, that whole thing of, well, if you're teaching, if you're doing that, that was a real distraction to your work. Yeah. But I can't be in the studio 7 days a week, 8 hours a day.
You need food for your art too.
Yeah, yeah.
But that brings up a cultural question. The arts in general, writing, visual arts, singing, is one of the only fields I know that you need a full-time job to support your full-time job. Yeah. So what do you think about the culture of art right now? I know it's a loaded question.
Well, I mean, the culture of art right now is stuffed. I mean, there are so many more people in the arts now than, so many MFAs, so many. And I think frankly, we actually live in a time, although there is tremendous disparity of wealth and there are so many people really struggling, we also do live in a time where a lot of people have surplus resources. And I think that's why that's showing up, that a lot of people are able to choose to be involved in the arts and find a way to make it work. Because for whatever reason, they're not just trying to get the next meal on the table. And then, as with so many of our students, and as you've explained earlier, it's, and being in New York too, I mean, most of the people I know there, it's very touch and go financially. But the life is very interesting, so people find a way and suffer for it and make sacrifices, but compared to the other choices, it's very deeply rewarding in a way that makes it worth to make that sacrifice. So
you need to define what success means to you and then find a way to make it work. Yeah. So that you're living a sustainable life and you're living your passion and you're making a living. Yeah. And usually it's all of those, it's not just one thing.
Yeah. And I mean, the simple fact we know is, a very, very, very tiny percentage of artists make a living wage on selling work.
Yeah, and that brings back to this tightrope we walk, and you touched upon it, of commercialism. You do too much work that's for the galleries of the public, and you kind of get labeled as a commercial artist, and you do too much of your own work, and you're not getting out there. It's kind of like this personal tightrope that people have to walk, and we've talked about this before, this commercialized side of art, and where do you find your center?
It's hugely difficult. Even now, I mean, I'm having the most successful stretch of my life right now in terms of those satisfactions. And all last week I was tearing my hair out about, I have not had a gallery now for about 5 years. And again, it's such an unclear path, and even now, as soon as people feel they have something, that they understand that they have a gallery, they have this, it tends to, it's good for about 4 years, and then you've lost that gallery, you've lost this, the art world has changed, the interest in your work has changed.
It's not a career you can just build your way up the ladder. It's very ebbs and flows.
But which is odd, because again, I think the high-end graduate schools now are, people are choosing them because they see it as a sort of path to a certain kind of wealth and celebrity, which is weird too. But it's, yeah.
All right, real briefly, we just touched on there's many ways that artists may define success, whether that's being in a gallery or being in a fellowship or getting a grant. Could you just touch briefly on some of those ways that artists can kind of work on their work, maybe make a living or a stipend, or just a little bit about what it is like to get a grant and what it's like to work in a fellowship and what it's like to get a gallery, just real briefly.
Yeah. First of all, grants are far less available now than they used to be. There was a time 20 years ago when state and federal governments gave grants, and there were less people competing for them, and many more grant possibilities. I think one thing that there are a great many residencies now, which are great and everything, but even they usually require some payment. There's very few that are just total out and out a free ride for 6 months or 3 months. Or
So what then is a residency? You go and live someplace?
yeah, so residencies are like McDowell Colony or the one I did in New York, the Sharp Foundation. Uh, they're very highly selective. Both McDowell and the one I was in, you may get for every 20 applicants for 1,200 positions, that kind of thing. But when you're selected, you get a couple things. You get a place to live, at least a place to work for a period of time. Some of them come with a place to live as well, some of them come with a stipend, some of them come with room and board. What they all come with is a community, because all the residencies tend to be a group of people in one place for a given time. Mm-hmm. And that's hugely important in terms of, especially the ones where you may be with writers, filmmakers, musicians, because that suddenly it gets to broaden your conversation. So they all tend to be a tremendous opportunity to leave with very good contacts. And then teaching is also a discouraging thing right now, because very few tenure track positions are available. All the all the colleges are moving more and more towards adjunct teachers, and particularly in the art, because they have long waiting lists of people who want to teach there, so they can get the adjuncts. And and as an adjunct, you're lucky to make, if you can make $25,000 a year, that's good. So again, as a piece of a whole practice, that can work, and it can lead eventually to tenure track. But it's a very crowded field right now. A lot of competition for not that many opportunities, both in terms of showing or grants or residencies or teaching.
And then galleries. What are the pluses and minuses of being in a gallery?
Well, galleries take 50% of anything they sell, which I have come to understand they fully deserve, because a good gallery, they're paying expensive rent, they're promoting your work, they have a presence, they're selling work for a lot more than I would sell it on my own. Yeah. I would not put a painting of mine on the wall and say, this is $10,000, but they need to in order to cover their expenses, and so that's why the prices are so high. A gallery, first of all, it's a tremendous boost to your self-confidence that somebody has chosen to support your work. A good gallery, they will actually, engage in conversation about your work. They'll do studio visits. Without interfering in too much and telling you what to do, they will be very helpful and supportive. Mm-hmm. They'll also keep their eye open for other opportunities and support you in that. And they'll also offer a community, because they want their group of artists to be supportive to each other, and so you're entering into a community.
Okay. And then, piece I still don't understand completely, being in a museum. What are the benefits, other than just like on your resume, I was in the museum? Yeah. What are the benefits of being in a museum?
Well, it's huge prestige, and plus the museums buy. I mean, sometimes, yes, there's a lot of situations where, but they buy at a good price, and it's. I have worked in museums, and of course the sad thing is it's work that will probably only rarely be displayed. My work was, tends to be displayed once when they purchase, and then it goes into storage, and then it's only if a show comes up. But it's a wonderful piece of prestige to be able to say I've worked in the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, and that's.
Do you find the museums buy mostly from galleries, yes, not from individuals?
Yes, and they should, because they understand that it's to their advantage to help keep that system alive, because the galleries provide a public place where they can encounter this work, and the galleries also serve as a sort of screening mechanism, for better or worse. Yeah. But the stuff that gets into the galleries is already impressed somebody, you know. So.
Because I think we covered a lot of ground. I was just going to again go back into the program that the Institute offers and what's different about it, and have you do your close. Okay.
So the NHIA MFA Visual Arts program is, I would define at this point, and again we're only 2 years into it, but this effort to make one's relation to art and art practice sustainable. And by that I mean that the work is deepened and broadened in the 2 years of experience that you have in the MFA program. You're challenged in a number of ways. You learn by conversation and about technical possibilities that you may not have been aware of. You learn about networking possibilities, but in the end, also hopefully you're really questioned about and supported in what is the reality of your practice, and how can you make that, how can you leave there feeling less anxious on a daily basis, on a weekly basis about, oh my God, why am I doing this? How can I keep doing this? You know, those are very fundamental questions, and they need to and can be addressed in graduate school. And they will remain, those questions will remain, but hopefully a student will come out with a better sense of how to sustain themselves through that doubt. Again, the doubt will remain, but how next time it comes around, how can I move on? You know, this is what I have. This is the group of people I have to support me, and everybody I see goes through similar doubting. You know, I think that's part of it too, is to understand that you're not alone in this. You're not, and also I think I'm really interested in that our program be devoted to people who are really interested in working with material stuff. That, you know, be they painters, sculptors, using those materials and broadening it in a way that's, you know, engages the contemporary conversation, but that it's also, you know, very much based in the studio practice as well. That the people who like to get their hands dirty, who like to work with stuff and materials and maintain that connection. And that's a difference from some of the other MFA programs, which are more theoretical and are more based in post-studio practice.
Okay. So the ultimate goal is sustainability, finding a practice that you can make part of your life. Yes. We all know that graduate school is not for everyone, so who would be an ideal candidate for the program at New Hampshire Institute of Art?
So there's two. One is, of course, the student who needs an MFA in order to, they're already working in a high school or college, they need the MFA to enhance their credentials, to go up a pay scale. That's a very concrete step. And of course, all of our students, I think, it's a very specific program for people who can't go to a traditional MFA program. I still think that in many ways a traditional MFA program where you're there week after week, 4 days a week in the studio with your cohort is probably the better way to do it. But most of our students, for whatever reason, mostly because of life, jobs, children, cannot go to a full-time program. So working with that constraint, this is the best alternative. I think that a good portion of our students are actually not looking so much for a concrete result. They are looking for a way to reconnect or connect with something about art that has always called to them. And they just want to be there with people who care deeply about this stuff, and they want to be asked questions, they want to be challenged, they want to deepen this thing that's kind of been hanging out there for them. I think the number of our students are really in that position. And then whether that leads to concrete career results or not is somewhat unpredictable, I think.
To be seen. So you've provided us with a wealth of information today. Is there anything you want to add about your work, about advice for artists, about the program? Anything at all you'd like to, Tim?
Well, earlier today I did an information session with potential students, and at the end the question of fear came back. And as I said, I think so many things we do in life really have to do with negotiating fear, because we don't ever leave it behind and everything. And ultimately, I do think that art has a huge cultural, political role to play. And frankly, to me, I think that the thing that destroys our world is fear, both on an individual level and on a cultural level. Mm-hmm. And I think that finding a way for people to negotiate their fear, to live in the fear, I mean, to not push it away, because I think that's, particularly Americans are very good at wanting to push fear away, but to engage in the fear and to actually find a place within it. And curiously, I think art does that, and I think a good graduate program does that in some mysterious way. It's not, again, it's intangible. Although at least you have to, there has to be identification that this is something we're working with here. It's not something that's over there. It has nothing to do with us. Yeah.
And so to feel the fear and work through it, to feel the fear and do it anyway. It's the only way you conquer fear is by going through it. Yeah. All right, well, thank you so much for your time. It's been great talking to you today. I hope that you found the information helpful. And we'll have Craig's information up at the end of the show, so if you have any questions, you can contact him directly. And thank you. This is Debbie Roy, and have a great day.